Tonight, live from St. John's, we bring you Newfoundland and Labrador's first and only Leaders Debate. The stakes are high for the three-party leaders. Voters head to the polls in just 6 days' time to ultimately choose the next premier. The stakes are also high for the province's future. The next leader must navigate a fiscal crisis, a controversial crossroads on Churchill Falls, and an overburdened healthcare system. It's the first time all three candidates have run as leaders. And tonight, they're vying for your vote. This is the 2025 Leaders Debate. Good evening and welcome to a 90-minute commercial-free debate live from CBC Studio in St. John's. I'm your moderator, Carolyn Stokes. We have a full house here tonight. Let's welcome our debaters. John Hogan is here leading the Liberals, Dinn representing the New Democrats, and Tony Wakeham for the Progressive Conservatives. And also here tonight, a team of local journalists who will join me in asking the questions that matter most to you. Ben Cleary is here from NTV, Cameron Kilfoy with The Telegram, and Russell Bowers of VOCM. Thanks so much for being here for what I hope will be an interesting and lively debate. And here is how it will work. A random draw decided the order. The leader who goes first will have 1 minute to answer the question before moving on to the second leader, and then I'll bring in the third. Now, my job will be to keep the candidates on time, on topic, and hopefully encourage some healthy debate. So let's get going with an issue that affects everyone.
My name is Chioma Skinner. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I'm a friend, and I live in Conception Bay, South Newfoundland and Labrador. For the election, what I find really important to me is the cost of living. Grocery, childcare, home expenses, these are all things that concern myself and my family.
You know, we've been hearing a lot of promises in this election campaign. And Mr. Wakeham, this first question goes to you. How do you plan to ease the cost of living burden for people like Mrs. Skinner who are struggling?
Absolutely. As I've traveled across Newfoundland and Labrador, I've heard lots of stories about people who are struggling to meet the cost of living. And that's why we've deliberately taken an approach to make sure that all of us will benefit from our reductions. We've turned around and said, we will turn around and increase the basic personal exemption to $15,000, the highest basic personal exemption on taxation in all of Atlantic Canada. And what that means, it means that you will pay no income tax on the first $15,000 of income you have. And we've gone further. We've gone out and said we will increase the seniors benefit by 20% and index it to inflation, because we realize that people are struggling, our seniors are struggling. And when it comes to other expenses that seniors should never have to pay, or no one should have ever had to pay, we will make sure that nobody has to see a private primary care provider without having to pay for it, like nurse practitioners they've had to pay for.
Mr. Wakeham, thank you so much. Now the question to Mr. Hogan. Now the cost of living crisis happened with the Liberals at the helm. What do you say to people who can't make ends meet and wonder how their lives will get better if the Liberals stay in power?
So, thank you very much for the question. It's a very important question and something that I've been hearing over the course of the last few weeks and during the last few months as Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. And it's an issue we've tried to address as the government over the last few years, reducing things like cost of registering vehicles and already increasing the senior supplement and tying it to indexing it to inflation. So we've seen that people need some help, and we've also guaranteed that we're going to do new things with the re-elected Liberal government here in this province. Most importantly, taking the PST, the provincial sales tax, on everybody's power bill in this province. So every month now, you will pay 10% less than you did in the past. That's very, very important, and every single dollar will add up, and it will be more money in people's pockets. People with families and people with children know how expensive it can be, and we've committed to making sure that children age kindergarten to grade 6 will no longer have to pay for school supplies, and we've provided free lunches for kids in school as well. Because children need to go to school, their parents don't need to worry about how they're going to feed them or how they're going to get the school supplies. Families need to know and parents need to know that their children are there just to learn. That's the most important thing.
Okay, Mr. Hogan, that's your minute. Mr. Wakeham, I'd like to invite you to jump in and speak with Mr. Hogan.
Well, it's great that after 10 years, they're starting to look at what they might do. Let's think about what they did. Let's think about carbon tax. Then they turned around and voted to increase it. Then they introduced the sugar tax. Let me tell you a story quickly about that, about a young family, a single mom who came to my office having picked up a $6 pack of powdered beverage and had $11 of payroll tax on it. Now they finally decided that they were going to eliminate that sugar tax, but only before the election happened. So these are measures that should have been done. When I think about the 300 fees that were increased, all of these measures have had an impact on the people in Newfoundland and Labrador. But we're not just stopping with the $15,000 of free income for the first 15,000. We're also going to turn around and make sure that our students are here, that we have paid work terms. Those are the things that matter to people, and that's exactly what we're going to do.
Okay, Mr. Wakeham, thank you so much. We're going to bring in Mr. Dinn now. What would your party do differently to help people with the cost of living?
It is ironic that Mr. Hogan, his first comment is about removing the HST and tax off home heating. And that's something that we brought forward in a private member's resolution 7 months ago. And MHA, Liberal MHA after Liberal MHA, said it couldn't be done, would not do it. We could have had 7 months of savings for people. So I find it a little bit disingenuous that this is now a platform. I don't trust that they will follow through on it. They had the chance to back it up, they didn't. The other thing that could save people money is signing on to the PharmaCare program. Could have done that a long while ago. They're going to study it. They're going to see what the best deal is. Meanwhile, I've got a gentleman who walks by my campaign office on his way over to the dollar store to get a bag of hickory sticks because that's the only thing he can afford. He's a diabetic. Having something like that would be a significant help to his cost of living. But we've also got a suite of issues there.
Mr. Dinn, I'm sorry, I'll interrupt you there. We just have another minute for all leaders to jump on in.
I'd like to jump in, and it's not disingenuous. When I became Premier, I was able to find a way to make sure that we could take the PST off the power bill. So I did show true leadership in making sure that we could find that fix, find that savings for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. It's something that people want and something that people need, and as leader, I was committed to doing that, and I am committed to doing that. The same way we've done things like Aging Well at Home grants and provide money for people to pay seniors who are at home and pay for things like grocery delivery and shoveling their driveways and things that they might not be able to do to put some more money back in people's pockets. This is things that we have done over the past few years, and we've already listed a number of things that we will do going forward in the future.
People wanted this 7 months ago.
Right.
People wanted this 7 months ago, and they couldn't find a way to do it until an election is called. It's pure and simple.
They could have taken out, he's a cabinet minister, he sat in the cabinet, he had lots of opportunity to voice his concerns about that, could have had it done, and the PharmaCare program should have been done long ago.
All right, let's move on now. Let's bring in our reporter panel. This next question comes from NTV's Ben Cleary, and it's about the tentative agreement with Quebec over hydropower on the Churchill River. Ben.
Thank you, Carolyn. Well, a former member of the Churchill Falls Independent Oversight Panel has called the MOU long, complex, and confusing. So my question is for you, Mr. Hogan. Why should people trust that this is a good deal when it's so hard to understand?
So he's not wrong. It is a complex deal. There's a lot of moving parts here, but I think what I've been trying to tell people over the past few weeks when I've been asked questions about it is really let's try and boil it down to what it is. We've been screaming since 1969 to get a new deal on the Upper Churchill River. We all know how unfair that deal is, and we all know how much money has been lost over the last 60, 70 years on this deal. We now have an opportunity at our fingertips to tear up this deal. People say wait till 2041. Two things happen if we wait till 2041. There might not be a deal on the table, and we will certainly not get the extra $17 billion between now and 2041. The other big point of this is that what's really upset Newfoundlanders and Labradorians is that the deal is not fair. We are not getting a fair price based on markets. And if you look at Schedule F in the MOU, which is a complicated document, it's very clear language in the schedule that any pricing that Hydro-Quebec gets out of this deal is based on market prices, and that will mean that they get more money and Newfoundland and Labrador will get more money as well. Schedule F, F is for fairness, and that's what Newfoundlanders and Labradorians deserve.
Ben?
Mr. Dinn, my next question is for you. What would you have to see to get on board with this Churchill Falls MOU?
Look, I was 10 years old when this first deal was signed. My granddaughter is going to be 10 years old when the next one is signed. And it's important to me that we get this right. So here's what I would like to see. One of the things that we definitely, but that we forced the Liberals into doing, along with the independents, was to set up an independent oversight committee. So I want to see that oversight, that independence and that transparency. And yet, we had a member of that team, of that oversight committee, step down. There is a resignation letter. He stepped down 3 days after Mr. Hogan was sworn in as Premier. So my question now is, because that was part of our deal for supporting the process, as to what happened. Release the I guess the letter of resignation in its full, and let's make sure that there has been no political interference, because from my point of view, there can be no partisan politics in this. We've made it clear from the beginning, in trying to be the adult in the room, that this is going to be based on its economic merits, its business
Thank you, Mr.
merits.
Dinn. I just want to interrupt you here and open it up for debate with Mr. Hogan.
So I actually agree with Mr. Dinn. This is not a political deal. This is not a Liberal deal. This is a Newfoundland and Labrador deal, and we absolutely do need to get it right. And the MOU is the backbone for an amazing opportunity for this province, the likes of which we haven't seen and we will never see again, so we do need to get it right. That's why this government opened up the House of Assembly, which had never been done before for any deal in our province's history, to allow the experts and the architects to be on the House floor to answer questions about the deal. It wasn't about questions to ministers, it wasn't about questions to the Premier of the day, it was the questions of the people who constructed the deal. And I commit to the people of Newfoundland and Labrador that the final agreements will also come to the House of Assembly. And not only that, if I'm Premier, my entire caucus will be given a free vote. It will not be about a whipped vote for Liberal members, because the most important thing is not about party politics. It is about getting this deal right, not only for us, but for generations of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to come. We owe them that.
Ben, back to you for a question from Mr. Wakeham.
Mr. Wakeham, you've promised to put the MOU to a public referendum. When would you do that? And how would you ensure that residents understand with full transparency the deal that you'd be asking them to vote on?
Absolutely. Let me start off first by saying we will develop Gull Island. We will develop Churchill Falls. But we will make sure that any deal we negotiate will be brought and before an independent review by an independent panel. That's what needs to happen. That's what was recommended when you think back to the inquiry we had. One of the key recommendations of that inquiry was to make sure that any agreements we were entering into, any mega projects, we were prepared to turn around and have them independently reviewed. That recommendation has not been followed. I don't understand why Mr. Hogan is afraid to do that. Is he afraid of Quebec? He talks about no deal coming. We have the power. Quebec has the need. We got to make sure that this is generational. This cannot be about simply doing it for election promises. It has to be about protecting the future of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, sending it to an independent review, and then allowing the people to have their say.
So Mr. Wakeham says he's going to develop Gull Island. I would ask him, how is he going to develop it? Who is going to develop it? And when is it going to be developed? We have been waiting to develop this forever and ever, and all it has ever been is rocks and water. We have an opportunity now with partners in Quebec to build the project at Gull Island at their cost and at their risk. And we know the history of the PC party is they want Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to pay for projects. With Muskrat Falls, the Liberal government wants Quebec to pay for this project and for us to earn the money that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians deserve. So how, when, who, and why are we waiting to develop a Gull Island? Why can't we develop it right now? Why can't we say to Quebec, we want a good deal with you that benefits Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, not only on Gull Island, but on Churchill Falls, so we can get the money we deserve now and not wait until 2041, when, by the way, again, there might very well not be a deal on the table, in which case all the assets on Churchill Falls will be stranded for every Newfoundlander and Labradorian for years to come.
We will have a deal. We will build energy. We will build industries in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. Quebec are dancing in the streets right now, and the press is telling them to keep their voices down because they don't want people to realize how good a deal it is for Quebec and bad for Newfoundland and Labrador.
Okay, thank you very much, leaders. Let's turn now to the topic of healthcare.
Hi, my name is Robin Dwyer, and I am a registered nurse in a rural hospital in the province. The demand and the need far outweigh the resources, the infrastructure, the staff that we currently have on the ground. We have this aging population. We have an increased need for healthcare services. Unfortunately, the infrastructure, the staffing, the resources has not grown to meet that need.
Some insight there from a nurse working in a rural part of the province. And Cameron Kilfoy has our next question.
Thank you, Carolyn. My first question is for Mr. Dinn. Thousands of people in the province are still without a family doctor, and many wait months, even years, for tests, and the system relies heavily on travel nurses. How would an NDP government recruit and retain the staff needed to fix the healthcare system?
First of all, it's about reinvesting and reprofiling that money that we're spending on expensive travel agency nurses, on the agencies who are profiting quite handsomely, back into the system to address the issues that nurses are facing. I met with the nurses union yesterday. The issues of, that are keeping nurses out, that are affecting retention, have to do with violence, inflexible work periods, mandatory overtime. Those are the issues that have not been addressed. It's interesting because agency nurses were brought in by Mr. Wakeham, perfected by the Liberals. And yet what we've got here is an over-reliance of this instead of addressing the issues that nurses have raised over and over again. So let's start by that. Let's start by making sure we're investing public funds into a publicly administered public health system and address the issues that nurses have been bringing to the table for as long as I can remember and have fallen on deaf ears. That's the first thing.
Mr. Wakeham, what do you make of Mr. Dinn's response, and what would you do differently?
Well, let me talk about healthcare, because I've spent most of my career working in health all over this province. I've had the opportunity to live and work all over Newfoundland and Labrador in the healthcare system. And it's our people that are on the ground in our healthcare system. They're the backbone of the system. And that's who we need to be talking about how to fix it. But let's start off with some simple stuff, like people who are waiting. You know, I'll tell you a story about a young woman who watched her husband die on a CT scan table because he did not get the diagnostics that he needed in time. You know, I can talk about now, and when you ask me why I'm investing in diagnostics, why I want to put more MRI machines in there, there are people waiting in Newfoundland and Labrador for more than 2 years to have an MRI. That's not acceptable. We have a plan in place to address shortages. We're going to train more doctors, train more nurses, train more nurse practitioners, and we're going to start our recruitment. When the medical people that are in our medical programs enter their professions.
Mr. Wakin, apologies, I'll interrupt here now and invite Mr. Dinn to jump in for an open debate between the two of you.
Look, I think what started out as a stopgap measure has grown into something that's the default system. But we have a plan. We've laid it out in our COSTA platform, a 4-year COSTA platform, about recruiting 1,000 new healthcare workers, about prioritizing recruiting allied health professionals, about expanding the nurse travel locum program province-wide, about creating 20 new seats at medical school, about implementing memberships. How about this? Paid work terms for nursing students, not only nursing students, but also education students and social workers. How about showing the respect from the get-go that that their work means something, or better yet, making sure that they have guaranteed of a full-time contract when they leave from the beginning, not a part-time casual position, which many have been offered. Start with that respect.
Dinn. Just going to head back to Cameron for a question from Mr. Hogan.
Mr. Hogan, you've pledged to phase out travel nurses, but the head of NL Health Services has said that agency nurses will always be necessary and hard to staff area. So given that reality, how would your government strengthen retention in rural parts of the province where stability is hardest to find?
Yeah, so I think that's exactly right. It is hardest to find stability in rural and remote parts of the province. We do have a tremendous amount of people in nursing school, and we want to make sure that they all get job offers, but we also want to make sure that they work in the communities where they want to go. So that's not necessarily in the places where there's vacancies. So that is unfortunately where travel nurses have crept in and agency nurses have crept in. The most important thing, of course, while it's unfortunate they had to be used, the most important thing was to make sure Newfoundlanders and Labradorians in all corners of this province got and received the health care that they needed and that they deserved. However, we have recognized that the amount of money spent on travel nurses over the last number of years, particularly since COVID, when there was a mass exodus of nurses from the system, has gone down drastically. In fact, we've reduced it by about 40% over the last number of years. So we need to continue to working on getting more nurses in the system. I think we've hired over 1,300 nurses in the last couple of years. We've gone outside of Canada and outside of Newfoundland and Labrador to India to bring in nurses here that can work and train and live in these communities. And we need to make sure we keep doing that. so that there are nurses available throughout the province for these individuals who need these healthcare requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. All three leaders, please.
Look, having agency nurses still does not address the basic issues that are driving nurses from the profession. You still haven't addressed mandatory overtime. You still haven't addressed the flexibility when it comes to getting off for holidays or stay with a sick child. You still haven't addressed the issue of violence.
And the
fact is the nurses union has actually offered solutions as to how you can staff for hard to fill remote positions.
But
Some of those solutions have been locals, which is
just a
Minister of
second.
Health. I was happy to
You
put
had
in
your
the local
point. I'm
program.
going to make mine. Let's talk about the fact that travel nurses are still being used all over Newfoundland and Labrador, while the registered nurses union will tell you that there are graduates who have not been offered full-time jobs. And when we talk about recruitment and retention, it's about developing that relationship with students when they enter that program, working with them as they go through their program to make sure we know where they'd like to practice and how they'd like to practice. That's what we're going to do.
Thank you. Let's hear now from a mental health professional about concerns they would like to see addressed during this election.
Hi, my name is Desmond Smith. I am a registered marriage and family therapist and co-owner of Landmark Counseling in Bay Roberts. And I'm really interested in having the mental health field more regulated and more accessible here in the province. We hear a lot in the province about mental health care through the lens of the new hospital, through the new addiction treatment facility, through helping law enforcement with crisis response teams. I'm really interested in making mental health care more accessible to the everyday Newfoundlander, the person who just needs support with whatever sort of mental health care issue they may be facing.
And on that note, let's slide into the topic of crime and public safety. It's a conversation that's difficult to have without also addressing mental health supports. VOCM's Russell Bowers has a question for the PC party leader. Russell?
Thank you, Carolyn, and good evening, gentlemen. As this person laid out, I mean, mental health and public safety are connected. We're seeing that through resources for police, people feeling safe in their neighborhoods, prison capacity, overworked Crown prosecutors and their staff. So I want to address various aspects of this. So, and what you all announced during the course of your campaign. Mr. Wakeham, we see drug-related deaths on the rise, crime and drug-related crime also on the rise. So you've pledged to hire more police officers. How will that solve root causes of crime stemming from things like poverty and mental health?
To your point about crime in our communities, you know, once upon a time, if you lived in Newfoundland and Labrador, you watched crime on TV and you went to visit your family physician down the road. Now, we have crime in our communities, and if we want to get a doctor, we have to go watch a TV screen. That has to change. But crime, the National Police Association has made recommendations on the number of RCMP officers that they would see as additional needed in our province. We've taken that recommendation, adopted that recommendation. So that's exactly what we're doing, more RNC officers. But we've also committed to more mental health crises teams, because the last thing you want having respond to you if you're in a crisis of mental health is a police officer. That's why these mental health crisis teams are so important, and we need more of them in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And I want to make sure that we do just that. Let's put more of those teams in place to help in those situations. And also, we've adopted not a cookie-cutter approach by talking about Labrador and the special needs that they have.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mr. Hogan, can I turn to you? I know that you've pledged to hire additional Crown prosecutors. This kind of comes back to the idea of recruitment and retention, because what is the recruitment strategy, or is there a timeline for it? And will it involve incentives to incentivize people to fill these vacancies?
So certainly, when I was Minister of Justice and Public Safety, we put in the budget an increase in salaries for lawyers who work in the Department of Justice, including Crown prosecutors, which was a long time coming. It is partially when you want to recruit and retain people. Of course, it is about a fair salary and a reasonable salary and a deserved salary for people who work so hard in the justice system. But it's also about workload. So more Crown prosecutors will certainly help that as well. And more police will help. I was asked a question a couple of weeks ago about, will more police necessarily mean more files for Crown prosecutors to deal with? And we were actually in Fogo Island, Cape Friels. Our candidate there is a former RCMP officer, and he talked about community policing. And he says more police officers will not necessarily lead to more arrests or more work for Crown prosecutors. It will lead to less crime, People want to see the RCMP and they want to see the RNC in their communities. They want to feel safe. And people who may be on the verge of doing something that are committing a crime, maybe talking to a police officer, talking to those mobile health crisis teams, those units will avoid those crimes in the future. So it's not an easy solution to say more police, more Crown prosecutors, more judges. It's a complex issue, and you have to look at all those aspects as one, because it really is an ecosystem and one affects the other.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. I'm going to invite Mr. Wakeham to respond. You both agree? More police officers? Where do you disagree?
Well, that's why we've talked about the need for more police, more Crown attorneys, but we've also talked about the need not just to have a cookie-cutter approach. We need to be talking about where we can put resources and how they fit. And that's why in Labrador, where they have special needs when it comes to mental health and addictions, we've committed to a program made in Labrador. That's the kind of things we ought to be doing, is not just simply saying we're going to have one size fits all. We need to be talking to people in their communities and find out what will work for them. And that's the approach that we have taken. That's the approach we will continue to take.
20 seconds.
Yeah, so, I mean, we have committed to more police officers. We've committed to doing what needs to be done in the circumstances around the province. I know that crime has been a serious issue for the last number of years, but we did create a police transformation working group a number of years ago to look at making sure that policing in this province is not done the way it used to be, but it's done in the modern way that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians deserve.
Mr. Dinn, let me ask you this question, because I know the other two leaders have touched on rural aspects of this issue. What do you see as an expanded role for the RCMP in some of our smaller communities, or do you even foresee an idea that the RNC could expand the scope of its operations in the province?
I've got to go back to the original question in the context of this, because we're talking about mental health and addictions and so on and so forth. We can't just police our way out of it. There's a role. But I'll tell you, from my point of view, and I've said this, that housing, the lack of housing, the mental health and addictions and the increase in crime, they're interrelated. It's not by accident that we've seen, at the same time we've seen crime increase, we've seen the significant rise of homelessness, also the fact that more people are in shelters than ever before, women fleeing, trying to flee intimate partner violence, have nowhere to go. I'll draw your attention to this, but there's a role for police, but it's got to be part of the solution. And I go to St. Thomas in Ontario, where Indwell, a supportive housing project organization moved in, and the calls to police dropped. The police chief said that addressing the root causes such as mental health, addiction, and housing insecurity requires a coordinated approach, not just increased police resources. And this has been forgotten in this whole thing about addressing the root causes of this. Pure and simple.
Mr. Dinn, I'll stop you right there and invite the other leaders to jump in.
Well, if I could, Mr. Dinn is not wrong when he talks about affordable housing and the need for housing. We saw that firsthand when we had the tents camped outside a Confederation building. But our government had no plan. There was no poverty reduction strategy. There was nothing. And at the end of the day, what did we wind up doing? We wind up rushing out, reacting, and turning around and signing a lease with a Liberal insider for a hotel, a Comfort Inn, which we spent $7 million a year on the lease and another $6 million in operating, almost $40 million, just because a problem.
So I would take
reacting.
exception
They
to that.
have no reaction.
I would say what the Liberal government did is saw people who didn't have roofs over their heads and made sure that we acted quickly to put a roof over their heads.
Should have had a poverty reduction
Made sure
strategy.
that the wraparound services were there for those people. It was an issue where there was people living outside. They still are, and we still have work to do. But that was an immediate situation, and we took action to make sure that those people had a warm bed at night.
Thank you, leaders. Let's shift now to the topic of immigration. And Mr. Dinn, a recent survey says nearly 3/4 of Canadians support reducing the numbers of immigrants moving to Canada. And during one of your own campaign announcements, we heard a member of the public blame increased immigration for the housing shortage. So how will you balance the need for more immigration with a growing concern from the public about the number of people coming to the province?
You know what the issue or the cause of lack of housing is? The lack of housing. It's the fact that we have not, in this province, we have 0.3% of non-market community-based housing compared with 4% nationally, 7% in the OECD. But it comes down to making sure that everyone who calls this place has a roof over their head. And I would say that this lack of planning has probably fomented these tensions. But here's the thing: 25% of this province are in the senior category, me included this time. So if we're going to have the services we need and for an aging population, we need younger families, and those are going to have to be from immigration. But it comes down to making sure that we have the housing and have the supports in place for everyone who calls Newfoundland and Labrador their home.
Thank you, Mr. Dinn. This question is for you, Mr. Hogan. The Liberals asked the federal government to increase the number of immigrants to this province, but we've heard from Ukrainians, for example, who have struggled to find work and to find housing. How do you ensure that newcomers have what they need to stay in the province?
So I think it is absolutely a need to have more people here in this province. Our province has been shrinking for decades, really since the COD moratorium, and there was a mass exodus of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians away from here. And nobody wants that. We all want Newfoundlanders and Labradorians to stay here. We want to create jobs. I mean, we could talk about Churchill Falls and the fact that we will have 10,000 jobs. 10,000 jobs for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. So we can really solve a lot of these problems by proceeding with this Churchill Falls deal, and that will provide jobs for people who are born in Newfoundland and Labrador and people who have come to Newfoundland and Labrador. And we want people to come. We are a welcoming place. We are a welcoming province. My daughter's in school now, and there's several Ukrainians there with her, and they're fitting in great, and they couldn't be happier to be here in this province. So we do need to make sure we work on those solutions and make sure that the supports are there for people who come here. I've been to a lot of fish plants around the province in the last number of weeks and number of months as well, and the temporary foreign worker program is critical to make sure that our rural parts of our province have that base, have that industry, so they can continue to thrive as well.
Okay, Mr. Dinn, feel free to have a conversation with Mr. Hogan about this.
Here's the challenge we see, and because we've seen, as I said, in the last 6 years, the increase in homelessness, and the other part with this has to do with increasing rents. So I've got a senior couple, who've moved from the center of the city in my district down to Placentia, because that's the cheapest place they could find. That the rent move was going from $1,200 where they were, which is difficult, to afford to $1,800 to $2,000. I don't know how many stories I hear this, and not just from people born and bred, but people trying to make a home here. They're paying a mortgage and rent, and they'll never qualify for a mortgage. So let's start by addressing the fact that we need to have the resources here, and that's housing, and also the pathway to actually work here in this province. Address those issues, and I think we can actually definitely create a more welcoming province for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Dinn. So, Mr. Wakeham, we haven't heard a whole lot of talk from your campaign about immigration during this election. What are your thoughts on the need for more newcomers?
Absolutely. When you think about the province, our province, all of us, unless you have an Indigenous background, are immigrants. Most of us came from Europe. My family came from Ireland and England. And we came here to make a living. We came here and raised our families. We have other people from other countries who want to do the same thing. But what we have to make sure of is that when we bring immigrants into our province, we bring them here so they can have a path for success, not simply to bring people in and warehouse them in a hotel. We need to make sure that we're able to house them properly, as Mr. Dinn has said. We need to make sure that there's jobs available for them. We want people to be successful, and that's exactly what I have been talking about for so long. We want to have a province where people simply don't come from, where they come to. And that's something that I think we need to focus on and need to make sure that those jobs are there, those jobs are available for them, and let's welcome people into the province of Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeham. Free for all
So I will tell you this: we've got to look at newcomers not only as finding a place to live, but they are also drivers of business. I think of SpiceX in my district, created by a newcomer to this province. I think of Newborn Lander, a social enterprise. I think of the various local stores and the businesses that are all run by newcomers. So they are creating economic opportunity and prosperity in this province as well. We need to remember that when we're talking about people coming to this province. They are contributors to our province.
That's exactly what needs to happen. We need to make sure that people can come here and be successful. And that's what we aim to do, and that's what we need to do. But as my colleague said, we've got to make sure that we have the infrastructure in place to be able to accept them.
Okay, Mr. Hogan, any final thoughts?
I just add, I mean, this issue has seemed to move a little bit from immigration and making sure that we have housing available, not only for immigrants, but for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as well. Cost of houses go up. It's simple supply and demand. I mean, we need more supply in this province. We need to work to make sure more houses are being built.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan.
We have solutions for that.
We're going to shift topics once again, and this time to public spending. I'll hand this one over to NTV's Ben Cleary.
Thank you. Mr. Hogan, you have said any government that runs a deficit after a deal with Quebec is signed is not doing a good job, but the province is borrowing more than it ever has before. So how will you put an end to this culture of overspending?
So the best way to put an end to the culture of overspending, and we should never overspend, even when we get this Churchill Falls deal, we should never spend more than we need to spend on what we deserve and what we want as Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. But when we're consistently running deficits in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and after a day, potentially in April, when we have definitive agreements and everybody knows that it's a great deal for Newfoundland and Labrador, we will then have an extra $1 billion on top of the deficit. So right away, the deficit will turn into a surplus. It is simple as that. Now we need to make sure that that money goes to services for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, but also look after our debt, look after our deficit. Let's look after the future of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. I'm very disappointed to see the PC platform come out tonight. And the way that they are going to spend the money, almost $1 billion when you add it up, including the cost of ferries, $1 billion, they're going to get rid of the Future Fund. They are going to pay for today for political reasons and take away the future of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. That is not the right way to do politics, and that's not the right way to govern Newfoundlanders and Labradorians.
Ben?
Mr. Dinn, the NDP have promised millions. Oh, sorry, this question is actually for Mr. Wakeham. Mr. Wakeham, you have promised millions as well in this campaign. Are the PCs, are the progressive Conservatives still fiscally conservative?
Absolutely. And to correct Mr. Hogan, $284 million in operating expenditure, and most of it will be found within the existing budget by the wastage that the Liberal government has incurred over the last number of years. The $240 million they spend on travel nurses, the $40 million they spend on the Comfort Inn, the $170,000 they gave to a soccer team in England, the Premier's office in Grand Falls, the office in Boston. All of these things are expenditures that people of Newfoundland and Labrador could do without. Those are the type of expenditures that we will look at and identify. But let me go back to the MOU. Mr. Hogan is prepared to mortgage the future of Newfoundland and Labrador to rush to sign a deal with Quebec that he refuses to send for an independent assessment. We have no idea whether those job numbers are actually going to be there. We have no guarantee those numbers for revenue have not been validated by an independent review. So yes, Mr. Hogan is rushing to make a deal with Quebec, and I don't understand why you will refuse to send it for an independent review.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeham. I'd like to invite you, Mr. Hogan. But first, actually, I would like to throw something in a very last minute, because we were hit with something last minute as well. I want to start this debate between you and Mr. Wakeham. Both of your parties released your platforms very late this afternoon, just before this debate. Can you talk about why you both decided to wait to the last minute to release?
I do want to talk about the fact that there's accusations of rushing a deal. We have been working on this deal literally since 1969. People in NL Hydro have been starving for this deal, and Newfoundlanders and Labradorians have been. Now, there's a little bit of a laugh over there when I said that. Okay, so fine. This deal has been on the table since December of 2024. That was 10 months ago, and we're still months away from target dates to sign the definitive agreements. And by the way, that's not a hard line. If we need more time to get the deal right, we will go beyond April 2026. So after all that time, after all the debate, after all the public discourse, we still don't know where Mr. Wakeham stands on that. Now, he decided not to vote in the House the day the MOU was voted on. The NDP voted, the Liberals voted, and the Independents voted. The PCs decided not to do their job and not to tell Newfoundlanders and Labradorians where they stand on this. And they still haven't told people where they are. Is it a good MOU or is it a bad MOU? So I would suggest when there's accusations about delaying, I would say the most important thing is to tell people your position on the most important deal in the history of our province.
We have been quite clear on where we stand in this deal. We will sign no deal until it has gone through an independent review outside of that. And once we have that, we will turn around and send it to the people.
Okay, that's time there. I'm going to go back to Ben for a question for Mr. Dinn.
Mr. Dinn, this question is now for you. The NDP have promised millions in new spending on things like healthcare, housing, cost of living. How will you pay for these commitments and address the debt?
So I'll start out by saying that whatever debt we have, whatever deficits we've run, whatever problems we have in healthcare, housing, mental health supports, crumbling infrastructure, you name it, has been brought to you by the Liberal PC tag team. As simple as that. We have not been in power, but it was important to us to release a costed platform, a 4-year costed platform that shows how we would profile some spending such as subsidies to oil companies or to nursing agencies and reprofile them into more or less helping the people of the province. So we took that as a sign of respect to the voters, because we've heard the accusations from both sides that we have no plan. Well, we have a plan. We've had a plan for the better part of 3 weeks. We don't have a plan. The first we hear of any plan from both Liberals and is today, after the early voting. But we've been very clear about demonstrating our work, how we got these numbers. I haven't seen that from either one of them. We had a lot of talk about spending, but not a lot of talk about the work.
I'll jump right in and invite both of you, all three of you, to talk about this.
Absolutely. We've been releasing our plan ever since this election started. Every single day, we've stood in front of the cameras and stood in front of the people in Newfoundland and Labrador and outlined our platform. A platform to make healthcare better, to lower taxes for everyone, for turn around and make sure that we took care of crime in our communities. Better healthcare, lower taxes, safer communities for all of us. And we've been talking about that since the campaign began, because the number one issue in this campaign is not the MOU or the secret deal with Quebec. It's actually healthcare.
So I have seen the plan, as I said, and the most upsetting and disappointing thing in that is to get rid of the Future Fund. So Mr. Wakeham, your slogan for this election is for all of us. I think that your election platform clearly says it's not about everybody in the future. It's not about my kids. It's not about my grandkids. It's about you. It's about you trying to make sure that you get enough votes now. But I'm more concerned with the future of Newfoundlanders
And that's
Labradorians.
time. Thank you so much, leaders. I need to move on to our next topic. This province has the country's oldest and most rapidly aging population, so seniors' issues will one day be everyone's issues. And that's our next topic, and Cameron Kilfoy has our next question.
Thank you. My first question is for Mr. Wakeham. There are many geriatricians in NL that say no new long-term care beds should open until there's better training for caregivers and staff and that there's stronger supports to keep seniors at home. How would a PC government change the way that we care for seniors and ensure that they stay in their homes longer and that workers have the training they need?
There's a couple of points I want to make on that one. The first one is when it comes to home care or home supports, we all talk about wanting to have seniors age at home, and that's used a lot. But in reality, until we make home care part of health care, because that's exactly what it needs to be, we need to make sure that our home care workers get the financial security they need, get the wages they need. We want it not to be simply a job, we want it to be a career. And we have to make sure at the same time that when we have enough workers that people are able to take advantage of that. And the supports that people need when their assessments are done, if they need to be reassessed. That's what we ought to be talking about, is how do we make improvements to that system. If we truly believe that home care is part of health care, then we will put the resources in place to make it happen so our home care workers feel valued and part of the healthcare system. That's how we're going to do it.
Mr. Dinn, how would the NDP change the way that we care for seniors?
Well, first of all, let's talk about making sure seniors have the resources they need to age well in their own homes. And we do have plans in our policies in our platform. But I'll give two stories. This young lady I met at a gas station, she's a home care worker. She's working at a convenience store rather than as a home care worker because she can make more money there and earn a living. There's the first problem. Or a couple I met out, both husband and wife who are home care workers, only getting 30 hours each, but not enough to buy a house at this point in time, not enough that one of them can afford to take time off from paternity leave if they need it. There is the problem. If you want to have workers, people to age well in home, anyone with disabilities otherwise, then you've got to make sure that the workers themselves are fairly compensated. And that means not just a decent wage, but also access to benefits such as health care and a pension. But the people I spoke to, they love their jobs. It's just that they cannot make a living at it. So the first thing, let's start addressing
I'd like to invite Mr. Wakeham to join in and have a conversation with you.
I agree with my colleague. And the other part of this is making sure that seniors can afford to stay in their own homes. because the second part of this is providing the home care workers, but also making sure seniors can stay in their homes, which we have talked about earlier in terms of increasing the seniors benefit stuff. But to go back to your question when it comes to our long-term care facilities, one of the biggest challenges of our long-term care facilities right now is our staffing models. When we think about the staff and how overworked our staff are and whether or not there's enough of them to actually do the jobs they're being asked to do, we know that people going into long-term care now are sicker, are more frail than they were years ago when they went in. But that hasn't been addressed. That's one of the things that I've committed to with the Nurses Union, with NAPE, and with CUPE, is to turn around and make sure that we have the right staffing model in place for the seniors that are in our long-term care facilities.
Mr. Hogan, you've promised on the campaign trail to establish a licensing and monitoring body for long-term care and personal care homes to ensure that standards are met. Beyond that promise, how would your government make sure standards lead to better care and not just more red tape?
Yeah, so tremendously important to make sure that people are being provided the best care, the proper care, and quality health care in Newfoundland and Labrador, and most importantly, our seniors. I've said, as I travel across this province, some seniors have built this province. They've worked in these communities throughout our province. They've raised families there, and they deserve and they want to remain in their, not only in their communities, but in their homes. So we want to keep them in our homes, and this government has implemented things like the Aging Well at Home grant. It's just $400 a year, and I've pledged to increase that to $800 a year. And the caregiver benefit, which is $400 a month, we've done that, and I've pledged to increase that to $800 a month. That's important money to allow individuals and seniors to stay in their homes and in their communities where they want to go as they age. We've also announced the creation of two things. Seniors Navigation Team, which is important for individuals to go out throughout the province and meet with seniors and help them with any issues that may arise. Maybe they're not technologically savvy, maybe they have difficulty downloading or filling out forms for applications for funding, and we need people to help them with that. We've also announced the creation of mobile health teams. So if a senior can't get to health, well then a healthcare worker can get to that senior.
That's your minute. Thank you, Mr. Hogan. All three leaders.
Can I take, let's go back to the health accord and about the social determinants of health, okay? Because we're talking about, I guess, the response to if seniors get sick. Mr. Wakeham's talked about the fact that we see more seniors with more sickness, and I would agree with that. And part of that is tied to the fact that they can't afford their prescription drugs, something that the pharmacare plan would have solved months ago or helped solve. We have seniors who've been living on the same income, retirement income, for decades in some cases. They can't afford they can't afford to stay together in long-term care facilities sometimes. But it comes down to making sure that they can afford food, that when you look at a senior's benefit that's increased by 25%, it's about getting at the source from the get-go so that we don't have as many people needing to go into long-term care. Shouldn't that be our goal? Shouldn't that be our goal?
That's exactly what I said, and that's why these grants allow individuals to stay at home for longer so they don't have to.
They're insufficient.
That's time. Thank you. Staying with our reporter panel, here's Russell Bowers from VOCM with your next question. Russell.
Thank you, gentlemen. We should talk about Labrador. And as you're all aware, of course, is that the cost of living and the challenges of living in the big land are varied and unique. But, you know, rather than me try and explain it, Carolyn, with your permission, I think we have a resident who can best sum up her thoughts on the challenges of life in Labrador. If we could go to that person.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elizabeth Saunders. I live in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador. Food tends to be cheaper on the island versus the Labrador portion of the province. You go up the coast of Labrador and food is ridiculously expensive. How can we help our people on the coast?
Thank you, Elizabeth, for your thoughts. And I want to start with Mr. Hogan. Elders have trouble finding Indigenous food sources, and that is just a small challenge. But what's your response to what Ms. Saunders had to say?
Yeah, so I think that what I believe as a Liberal and a member of the Liberal Party in Newfoundland and Labrador, if I can sum it up in one word, is fairness. People should be able to pay the same amount of food regardless of where they live, regardless of who they are, regardless of what their background is. Everybody should have the same opportunities to go to school and to develop their minds and develop their skills, to get good jobs in this province so they can contribute to the economic well-being of other Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, whether it's healthcare, education, access, and food, as this lady raised. We need to make sure that everybody is treated fairly. I know things are more expensive in Labrador. I've been to Labrador a number of times and talked to people there about this specific issue. We certainly heard that with regards to the cost of flying back and forth, even from Labrador to the island, which is why we implemented a lower cost ticket allocation for people in Labrador to reduce that cost as a pilot. Now, to be honest with you, when I went to Labrador, people said, that's great, thank you, but it might not be enough in the long term, so we may very well have to revisit that. And that's why it's a pilot, and that's why it's important to listen to people in Labrador talk about how it is to live there in remote, rural parts of our province.
Mr. Dinn, if I could turn to you on that, because certainly there are a lot of recruiting and retaining professionals or issues around that for anyone who wants to make Labrador a home. So, I mean, how does a fiscally challenged government address these issues and lower the financial burden for people living on the North Coast and throughout Labrador?
Well, two things I'll say about that. You know, when we talk about fiscally challenged, we're either going to pay for it now or pay a lot more later for the problems that come with it. That's the first thing. But we do have, again, I go back to our platform, 4 years costed, and it does address some of the issues such as housing and more affordable not-for-market housing. But I'll go to Labrador West, where I've had the chance to visit, and I've heard the MHA for Torngat speak eloquently about it in the House of Assembly. But yet up in Labrador West, if you're working in the mine, it's difficult to find an affordable house, but you've got a better chance. A bungalow that's selling for over $500,000, that's outrageous to me. So, but if you're working at a job that in the service industry, good luck. So let's talk about addressing the housing shortage up there, and that's part of our housing plan. Let's talk about making the cost of medical travel a lot cheaper, so people can actually get to their appointments without paying out $1,600 a shot, and then struggling to get their companion.
That's your
to come
minute,
along.
Mr. Dinn. Care to respond, Mr. Hogan?
Yeah, so Labrador West specifically, I think when you talk about high cost, it certainly is the high cost of housing in that part of the province. And it's not only that, it's where to build more houses and more units. We've heard those conversations as well in Labrador West. And that's why they really want this MOU to go through on Churchill Falls. They've been screaming for more power. And with more power comes more opportunity, more mining opportunities, more jobs, and the ability to build those houses that people need and people want. What they do want in Labrador West is that there's seniors there now who went there years ago, and it used to be all fly in and fly out, but they've chosen to stay there and raise their families and their kids and their grandkids.
With all due respect,
we need to build houses for them, smaller seniors houses is what they're asking for.
When he was in, raised over and over, I don't know how many times about the need for housing. I don't know how many times a person has to repeat it before the message sinks in. And still nothing has been done, or very little to address.
So that's not true. We've just provided extra funding for
just
infrastructure so they can build housing.
Just provided.
Thank you, leaders.
Right.
Russell.
Mr. Wakeham, as we've talked about the fact your party's platform came out today, so for anyone in Labrador thumbing through the manifesto, what would you point to them as this is our priorities for Labrador?
Absolutely. We've talked about what the investment we're going to make in Labrador for mental health and addictions, which is a huge issue in Labrador. We've announced the tax freeze, first $15,000 income for all of us. We've turned around. But when I think about it, and one of the big things that we haven't talked about is healthcare. The healthcare, the travel from Labrador to get healthcare on the island. Many of the people in Labrador are forced to travel to the island part of Newfoundland, Labrador. That's why I've turned around and said we will put an MRI machine in Labrador to save people the cost of having to travel out regularly for simple things like an MRI. And we're also going to turn around and make sure that when you do have the travel for medical appointments, for all of us, whether it's Labrador or not, we will cover your cost 100% of the time. You know, for too often, too many people have been left behind, wondering about whether or not they can afford to travel out for their medical appointments. We're going to make sure that nobody will have to worry about that again, because we're going to take care of it 100%. Okay.
All three leaders, 1 minute, free for all.
One of the things we've put forward is about guaranteed basic income. Now, Mr. Wakeham's party had a poverty reduction plan, and I will give him credit. It actually reduced poverty.
It worked.
But I will say this, to even discuss the guaranteed basic income, a concept that would benefit, I guess, people all across the province, the Liberals had to be dragged into a kicking and screaming. And even then, it wasn't until the last minute that we completed the report. But there are recommendations there that we put forward that could actually help us address some of the issues, because a lot of the issues we're talking about, whether it's food, housing, it comes down to an income issue. But if we're talking about affordable housing, then let's talk about rent controls and vacancy controls so that rents are not forcing people into homelessness.
Mr. Dinn is right. We had a poverty reduction strategy that was considered one of the best in the country. The Liberals scrapped it. We intend to bring a poverty reduction strategy back in.
And that's time for this topic. Well, from the north coast of Labrador to the North Shore, let's hear now from some voters living in Conception Bay North.
Hi, my name's Haley Poudan, and I am from Adams Cove. I recently moved here during the Kingston wildfires. An issue in this election that is important to me is about food accessibility and sustainability in the CBN and other rural remote areas of Newfoundland and Labrador, specifically when there is an emergency disaster response.
Hi, my name is Robin Dwyer. I was one of the volunteer coordinators for the evacuation center during the Kingston wildfire. As well, myself and my family lost our home as a result of the Kingston wildfire. This, I believe, is just the beginning of what is going to be the norm in terms of wildfire seasons during the summer in this province. And it will happen again, unfortunately. There are almost 200 families that are currently without a home. We need to rebuild. We need to have provincial support and government support for that to happen to ensure that the North Shore just doesn't become a burnt area on the province's map.
A lot of people worrying that this is becoming the norm. Mr. Dinn, this question for you. This was a historic and devastating wildfire season. Weather events are intensifying, not just wildfires, but also hurricanes. What is your party's plan to help the province and residents adapt to this new climate reality?
The first thing to the residents in that fire, I have tremendous sympathy for them. I volunteered there several times during it. My family is from there. That's where the Dinns originated, in that area. I will say that from my observation, certainly the government was doing the best it could in response to that. Okay, but this is going to be the norm. So it's going to have to come down to making sure we can get people back in their homes quickly as possible, because we're going to have another disaster next year, guaranteed. But not only fires, but if you listen to the reports, it comes down to wells drying up, water shortages. Farmers are hitting crisis. You've got farmers asking people not to use bales of hay because they need it for feed. So we've got a much bigger issue, and that's about addressing the whole issue of climate change and mitigating that. We understand it. I don't know if the other parties do.
All right, thank you, Mr. Dinn. This question is for you, Mr. Wakeham. With more damaging weather events expected, what would a PC government do to be proactive rather than reactive when disaster strikes?
Absolutely, but let me also join with my colleagues, because all of us here recognize the significant destruction and disaster that happened with the Kingston fires this summer and the devastation that it caused and the more than 200 houses that were destroyed. You know, and I want to thank all the volunteers and the volunteer fire departments and everybody that was involved with it, because it is something. And now that we've had that disaster, we got to make sure we're there to help them build, just as the lady had said in the interview. We need to make sure government is there to work with them to build. On the issue of preparedness is what it comes down to. We need to be prepared. You know, when you have a fifth water bomber and it goes down in 2018 and you fail to repair it for 5 years, and it's only now getting repaired at twice the cost of what it would have been back in 2018, that's not preparedness. What we ought to be looking at, and that's why we've decided we're going to hire more wildfire officers in the field. We're going to hire them 4 weeks earlier, and we're going to hire 25 more of them so they can go in and start to look at where we might establish fire breaks, what we can do to clean up rubbish. All of those things are important.
Thank you, Mr. Wakeham. Mr. Dinn, what do you think of that plan?
Look, it's all part. Whatever the plan is, it's going to have to be coordinated. One of the things I heard in talking to firefighters, and these are volunteer firefighters in many cases, laying their lives on the line, and sometimes putting out fires on their own homes or their neighbors' homes. But certainly a coordination as we go forward, and this is going to become the norm, as this is a dress rehearsal, I've heard one meteorologist call it. Then it's about the coordination between wildland firefighters and, I guess, your structure or your volunteer firefighters or the professional firefighters, about coordination going forward. There's a need, I guess, in certainly making sure that communication is established, because that was the biggest source of anxiety and frustration I heard from the people at the school, is not knowing. And I think that would go a long way to reducing fear and reducing the rumors and the conspiracy theories as well.
Thank you, Mr. Dinn. Now to Mr. Hogan. Mr. Dinn talked a bit about this. The dry summer forced many communities to declare a state of emergency due to critical water levels, and farmers say that they're operating in crisis mode. How will your government ensure that the province is ready for these major environmental events?
So this was a very difficult summer for a lot of people in this province, and particularly people on the shore, the North Shore there. And I've met with Robin several times when I was back and forth to that part of the province, and can't thank her enough for the volunteer time and effort she put in. I know she's lost her home and her husband, her little boy now. He's had to move to a different school, away from his friends. So it's an incredibly difficult time for people in that part of the province. But we all saw them come together. We saw the volunteers and the Salvation Army and the Red Cross and the firefighters and the pilots and the dispatchers. And we talk about communication, and the Provincial Emergency Operations Centre really did an amazing job of coordinating a huge effort across the province, and I can't say thank you enough to them. But the question is, what are we going to do in the future? I mean, thankfully, we did a pretty good job of managing these fires this summer. We lost structures, but we saved a lot of structures as well due to the brave work of the firefighters. Our government is committed to getting an additional asset here when we need it, an additional heavy lift helicopter to fight those fires in the future. We talk about food security. We will increase the amount of money that communities can have from $750 to $1,500 to grow their own food in communities. So if they are cut off, like, for example, parts of the province were, including down in Harbour Breton, and increasing that money for individuals as well.
Opening the floor.
Well, I think one of the things that my colleague Mr. Dinn hit on was the communication piece. And when I was talking to people in that area, one of the biggest challenges for them was being able to get a hold of family and friends because of the lack of cellular coverage. And that's why we've announced as a party that we're going to invest a further $3 million to make sure that we start bringing cell phone towers all across the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we'll start right there.
I just want to get back to the question again, because it was talking about being really prepared from a food security standpoint. I also heard from farmers on the other side of this province, on the west coast, in the last few weeks, talking about the drought and the severe effect it's had on hay and feeding their livestock. So we have committed to working with them to make sure that that supply chain doesn't break down in the future, so we can have our own food grown here in Newfoundland and Labrador, because over the past 2 or 3 years, we have seen entire peninsulas and entire communities get cut off. We need to make sure that doesn't happen in the future.
And that's time. On to the next topic, which is a similar topic. Of course, we saw hundreds of homes lost in those fires this summer. So let's stay on the topic of housing, and we go to NTV's Ben Cleary for our next question for Tony Wakeham.
Thank you. Mr. Wakeham, there are over 2,500 people on the wait list for NL housing, and many units in use are old or need repair. So how will you increase public housing to meet demand and maintain what already exists?
Thank you for the question. It's amazing that when you think about the number of units that we have, and it goes back to, as my colleague talked about, a poverty reduction strategy. And housing is part of that. Unfortunately, the Liberals did not have a strategy. We heard them in the House of Assembly announce that they had built some 700 and plus homes, and the actual number turned out to be less than 20. At the end of the day, we have a housing issue that we got to talk about, the suitability of issues. How many houses that Newfoundland and Labrador Housing Corp had in their inventory that were actually not repaired in time, that actually had to be torn down because of states of disrepair? How many others have not been repaired on a timely basis? And then we got to make sure we look at, can we make sure how we divvy up those houses? We have single people staying in 3-bedroom houses. You know, we got to start looking at how do we make sure we match up the need with the inventory that we have and build new ones, especially for seniors. Seniors cottages worked in the past. Seniors communities worked in the past. Let's get back to that. Let's work with developers. Let's work with others to make sure we do those things.
Mr. Dinn, how would you address that wait list that's 2,500 people long?
Well, in our platform, we've establishing a NL Homes, which would be a standalone and self-sustaining, self-financing corporation that would build these non-market homes, community non-market non-profit homes to address this shortage. 1,000 a year is what we're looking at. The problem we see, because Newfoundland and Labrador Housing, I think, where it's been brought into government, it seems to be unable to do it. This organization would not be tied to the provincial debt, it would be self-sustaining. But here's the thing, down on Livingston Street, 3 fires in 3 years in Newfoundland and Labrador Housing. One was sold to a private investor. The other was leveled, with no plans to rebuild. And another one recently caught on fire, and I don't know what's going to happen to that. There seems to be a lack of will or political will to actually rebuild the stock and repair the stock of Newfoundland and Labrador housing, which will go a long way to address this.
I'd like to invite Mr. Wakeham to join in with Mr. Dinn.
Absolutely, and that's what we've been talking about. Jim and I both agree on this point, that it's all about affordable housing, but it's also about a housing crunch, as was alluded to earlier, because we have to look at the full continuum. We have seniors in our province, and especially in Labrador, that are looking to downsize, and they want to have something that they can afford to move into. And that's where we talk about seniors' cottages, freeing up Crown lands for developers, freeing up Crown lands for towns, so that we can build those seniors' cottages and people can actually move into them. That will free up their homes for others to buy. And then we can also talk about building new, but it's got to be the full continuum. That's why we need to do this.
Any final thoughts, Mr. Dinn?
Look, the other thing, I'll get into it, is let's start looking at rent and vacancy control, something that the Liberals have refused to bring in, which would keep people from being evicted and stabilize that housing issue.
Thank you, thank you.
Mr. Hogan, the province needs to build thousands of homes to keep up with demand. How would you work with private builders to make that happen?
So absolutely, as I said earlier, this is a supply and demand issue. There's a reason houses are going up in cost is because we don't have enough of them. We need to increase that supply. I've heard from communities and town councils across this province that they're frustrated by how long it takes to get to Crown land and to give them an approval to build land in their communities. So we announced a couple of weeks ago with Greg French, our candidate in Terra Nova, who probably knows more about the law on Crown land than anyone else in this province, about a plan to make sure we know exactly what is and what isn't Crown land. And when we know that, we have to make that land available for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. It's their land. If it's individuals, or if it's communities, or if it's contractors, let's make the land available. We have plenty of it in this province, and let's build houses. We need to make sure as well that NLHC is not just building low-income houses, but affordable houses for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians as well. And the last thing I'll say, we announced a major projects office this week. I think we can include in that building numerous houses, building big chunks of houses in various parts of the province. They are major projects, it's needed, and we need to streamline the process to make sure they get built now and they get built fast.
I can only remember the whole, when the government said they built 750 housing units. I remembered because I lost my speaking privileges as a result. They only had 11. So I hear the promises, I hear the commitments. I haven't seen the actual responsibility because we still have the spending on emergency housing shelters has over tripled from $4 million in 2019 to $14 million now. And the number of beds doubled. These are people without a home. Right. So where's the plan? We've known about this for so long. You've known about it. Your party's known about it. And only now we've got plans.
For a second. One of the biggest issues, too, facing people is the red tape. I had a developer call me up. He had approval to build 8 housing units, income support housing units, affordable housing. He put the roof up, he had the walls up, and then he waited 8 weeks to get the final permit. He wound up laying off his staff. We got to eliminate that.
Just want to let this conversation continue for a moment. Mr. Hogan, there was a few attacks directed at you there. Do you care to respond?
Yeah, so we have done other things to make sure that there's housing being built here in this province. We've provided residential rental property rebates, provided housing development loan programs, unlocked surplus government land already, and buildings as well. We've established the homeowner assistance program and provided secondary and basement suite incentives. So we have taken initiatives. Now I do think it's time to think big. Let's make sure we build a lot of supply. And how do we do that? We free up land, we work with communities, and we work with developers to make sure that not 1 or 2 or 3 units, but hundreds and hundreds of units are being built in this province.
And one of the best ways to do that is we have a number of municipalities all over Newfoundland and Labrador who are leaders. We could be freeing up Crown land within their communities to allow municipalities to have control over their Crown lands so that they're not tied up waiting for the provincial government to give them access to the Crown land. That is just one small step that could be taken that would actually improve and may speed up the process.
Over time here now, but
this was a problem 6 years ago. And in that time, homelessness has gotten worse. And I brought it to the House of Assembly over and over again when it comes to the increased rent. Seniors facing eviction for the first time because they can no longer afford to live. And each time we've got a province here where 0.3%, that's what we have in affordable non-market housing stock compared to 4% federally. if you want to think big, what we're offering here in our platform is thinking big, but making it more non-market, community-based housing that's going to take care of the deeply affordable and supportive housing that people need. Not something that's profit-driven, and I understand that, but it's not going to help the people who are at the verge of losing their homes.
Okay, thank you, leaders. And here's a possible solution to consider. This is coming from a voter living in Newfoundland and Labrador housing.
My name is Tina Han. I live in Newfoundland Labrador housing in Center City, St. John's. It's called Buckmaster Circle. There are kids in this community that are in poverty. There's kids in this community that do not get 3 meals a day. There are families here that depend heavily on school lunch programs and breakfast programs. I cannot tell you the last time I actually bought a 2-liter of cow's milk. If the government implemented some sort of guaranteed basic income where nobody can fall below a certain threshold, that would help.
Some big concerns there, specifically for families with young children. So let's stay on that topic and go to the telegrams. Cameron Kilfoy for our next question.
Thank you. Mr. Dinn, affordable childcare remains a major challenge. We spoke with one expectant mom on the Avalon who's straddling nearly 200 wait lists, and that's in her 4th month of pregnancy. How will you create more affordable childcare spaces to ensure parents who want to return to work can?
Well, it starts by making sure that the early childhood educators who man these centres are well compensated. Again, I go back to the stories I told you earlier, where people they've moved on from these jobs because the pay is inadequate. They don't have any chance of having a pension or sick leave. That's the other thing. And we've got it in our budget for sick leave. But it's about addressing the issues of pay and bringing everyone into, I think, the public system, standardizing the pay, standardizing the benefits, standardizing healthcare. A lot of the healthcare workers, or not healthcare workers, but early childhood educators, love the job. My granddaughter is finally into a regular $10 day childcare, and it's a huge help to to my daughter, but to anyone. Any professional, it's about having that affordability, but that means you've got to compensate the people, especially if children are our most valuable resource.
Mr. Hogan, what do you make of that response, and what is the Liberal strategy for creating more affordable childcare spaces?
So we've been working on this strategy ever since we partnered with the federal government to create more spaces in this province for Newfoundland and Labrador children and families, and to reduce the cost. I'm the only one up here that is actually paying for childcare costs right now. I have a little boy who's in daycare, and you know what? My daughter was there too not too long ago, and we had a bit of a struggle to make sure that we could find a space, and there was months where we didn't, and we were on that wait list. So I know the struggle, I know the strain it puts on families when one parent can't go to work, which means you're not getting the income that you would expect. You have to stay home with your kids where you could be paying $10 a day to get them in that space. So it was a long road to create those spaces and to reduce those costs. The road is getting better. More children are in $10 a day daycare now than they ever have been, and we continue to create those openings and those spaces for future families in this province. It is very, very important. Families deserve that. They deserve to have their kids looked after while they are able to go to work and continue their careers, the mom or the dad, continue their careers and continue to contribute to the economic society for this province.
A lot of parents listening carefully to this, so Mr. Dinn, Mr. Hogan, feel free to talk.
Yeah, I know it, I get it. I understand that the wait list was too long. The reason the wait list was too long was because we moved very fast in making sure that everyone was aware that it was $10 a day. That was a good thing to do. That's the right thing to do, to decrease that cost so families can afford to put their kids in daycare so they can continue on with their careers, as I said. But there was a sense of frustration. So let's acknowledge the frustration, but let's acknowledge that things are getting better, that more spaces are opening up, that more kids are in daycare now than they ever have been before. How important is it?
You can open up the as many centers as you like, but you still need people to staff them, and you still need people who can walk away at the end of their career that they've got something that they can retire on. You also need to make sure that people who are in these positions have access to sick leave. anyone, and I as a teacher I would know this, that next to small children they are vectors for all sorts of disease. So it's easy for a teacher and early childhood educator. Sick leave is absolutely essential. So those benefits would make the profession a lot more attractive.
With all due respect, it's not just teachers who know it. Parents know it. Families know it. I know it because I talk to these individuals every
I'm
single
talking
day.
about the
We're
people
going to
who
open
work
it up
there.
for a debate between all three of you in just a moment. But Cameron, you have a question for Mr. Wakeham first.
Yes, Mr. Wakeham, the province is committed to $10 a day childcare, but families say that that doesn't help if there's no spaces available. So beyond funding, how would a PC government make sure there are enough childcare spots and that the early childhood educators are supported to stay in the field?
Absolutely. Let me tell you what we have outlined. I have met with parents and I have met with operators of childcare centers. And one of the biggest challenges we have childcare operators who want to expand. We have childcare operators who want to open, but they're being hung up by the red tape associated with all of the procedures and everything that they have to go through to get licensed to open up. We need to streamline that process. Yes, we must have regulations. We must ensure the safety of our children, but we also must find a way to streamline the process. I've heard from other operators who are part of the $10 daycare who do not get paid on time. They have to pay their staff, but the government has failed to pay on a timely basis to them. Those are real issues. And when it comes to early childhood educators, we have put in our platform $5 million to work with operators to develop a pension plan for childhood educators, so we can early childhood educators to keep them in the field. Those are just some of the things that we've talked about.
Okay, let's get this full debate going again. Let it loose.
Yeah, so everybody knows early childhood educators and teachers are so important for our kids in this province and really in the country. I mean, they are spending more time with our kids than their parents are, in all honesty. They're there all day from 9 to 5 in some situations with after-school care as well. They do need to be compensated. They do need to be treated with respect, and we need to make sure that they realize that we know how important they are. But the system is getting better. As I said, we have a lot of kids in daycare that we didn't have a few years ago. The number is now up to over 11,000 people. So not only are those kids being looked after, families are saving money. They're saving almost $6,300 a year. So it's an affordability issue, it's a fairness issue, and it's a child care issue all at the same time.
I think I go back and when we were first elected in 2019 and affordable, when we had a minority government, and at that time the Liberals came to us about some sort of confidence in supply. Our demand at that time was a $25 a day childcare. Couldn't be done until there was an election. So my fear is that in the rollout of this, the planning hasn't always been there.
And that's time. Thank you so much, leaders. We're going to transition out of that topic now to transportation. For the next question, let's go to VOCM's Russell Bowers. Russell.
Gentlemen, cards on the table. I'm a proud native of Bell Island, so I want to ask you some questions about the provincial ferry system on behalf of the hundreds of thousands of residents and tourists who use the service sometimes every day. These are problems that go back decades, and so my questions aren't necessarily political, but more of governance. Mr. Hogan, if I could approach you first. Over the last 10 years, there have been residents and crews who have said that fleet maintenance either isn't done right, or when it is done, it's done at the height of tourist season, and so the ships are out of service. If we turn to government, how can you assure ferry users and residents that you'll reform the Department of Transportation and the way it runs the provincial ferry system?
Yeah, so your question is premised on the fact that it needs a great deal of reform. I think we need to make sure that people who use the ferries are using ferries that are safe, are using ferries that are reliable, and I know that they're using ferries that are priced appropriately and fairly non-expensive for individuals who do need to travel back and forth from all remote parts of this province. When we talk about ferries, and I mentioned earlier that the PC plan includes almost $1 billion in new spending. Mr. Wakeham tried to correct me, but he is committed to building 4 new ferries, $60 million each. Now, the issue with that is that $60 million is for the cost of ferries 15 years ago. 15 years ago. So we all know since COVID, prices have doubled. They've certainly doubled in the last 15 years. So that cost really now is at least another $250 million for 4 new ferries in this province. And he can't explain how he's going to pay for that. So we do have ferries that work. We need to make sure that they're accessible for people who use them. And we've committed to a swing vessel in the event that these ferries do go down, which does, of course, happen time to time. So that swing vessel will be available to move all across our province in the event that it's needed.
Well, Mr. Wakeham, I want to jump on that promise or pledge that you've made to acquire 4 new vessels. Under a previous Tory government, 2 identical boats were purchased, one for a route that's 90 minutes and one for a route that's 20 minutes. So before making any purchase, what's your commitment to getting input from ferry users on the appropriateness of these vessels and also getting the input from unionized crew?
Absolutely, because to your earlier point about the maintenance issues with our ferries and the cost of maintenance and the delays in maintenance, I've heard all those stories. I've spoken to the workers that work in the Department of Transportation that work on those ferries, and they will tell you, why does it take so long for a provincial ferry to be repaired? Why is it so long? Why does it build up? And we have all these breakdowns. And then Mr. Hogan's point, if he wants to continue to allow ferries to be running on our system that are more than 50 years old, that have continued to break down, to continue to cause grief, pitting one community against the other, I'm not prepared to do that. I'm going to invest in new ferries in Newfoundland and Labrador, but in addition, I'm going to invest in a new industry because we're going to build those ferries right here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We're going to put our workers back to work. People that work at Trades and other unions will be able to stay home to home, work right here. Let's build our own ferries. Let's maintain our own ferry fleet. But it's time for a ferry the program to be started, and that's exactly what we're going to do, one at a time.
Mr. Hogan, I'd like to invite you to jump in.
Yeah, so I would say if you're going to spend $500 million on 4 new ferries, that's fine. But tell Newfoundlanders and Labradorians where the $500 million is coming from. I already know where a couple $100 million is coming from. It's coming from our future fund, which was meant for the future of this province, for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, for young children, for grandchildren, and Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who aren't born yet. In fact, when we announced that future fund and implemented it, it was applauded by banks, it was applauded by people across this country as the right thing to do. I think about when oil was $130 a barrel, when the PC government was last in charge. Imagine if we had created a future fund then, the amount of money we would have available, maybe to build those ferries that you're talking about. But the fact of the matter is, you're not being accurate about how much these are going to cost, and you're not telling Newfoundlanders and Labradorians where you're going to get the money.
We're going to turn around. We're not going to mortgage the future of Newfoundland and Labrador. You, sir, are mortgaging the future of Newfoundland and Labrador by rushing to sign a deal with Quebec that clearly has not gone before an independent review. I don't know what you're hiding. I don't know why you're afraid. You mentioned that we've been negotiating for 10 months. We could have had an independent review done by then.
Mr. Dinn, I want to ask you a question because, you know, there's certainly issues of staffing on the ships, crews. Sometimes, you know, they can't get enough crews to work on a particular day. And then on the other side of it, on the tourist side of things, you have tourists who show up at a boat. They don't know how long the line is before they get there. They don't know when the next run necessarily may be. What do you think could be done to address those issues for tourists and crews?
I personally don't have a solution, but I can tell you where I'd start. I would start with something that you meant by talking to the workers themselves, the people who are running it, who are day in, day out on moving the ferry back and forth. I've been in the lineups. I've been on the load and go to get over to Bell Island back, and the other ferries too in the province going over to up to Labrador in the summer. So it comes down to, I guess, I'm not an expert in it, but I can guarantee you that the people on these ships, on the wharfs, on the docks, loading people, they are the experts. Most of the time, their expertise is not sought after. It's not considered. I think I would have to start with that. I know what I've read, by the way, with regards to the last 2 ferries, the AG report on those 2 ferries, and it's interesting. It's almost like a how not to do something manual in terms of just the lack of oversight and the, I guess, the lack of involvement of government in departments in making sure that these ferries didn't have the problems they're now faced with.
I'd like to open up the floor now.
That's why we're going to build ferries right here in Newfoundland and Labrador. I mean, maybe Mr. Hogan could tell us how much money has been spent on maintenance on our ferry fleet, including the 50-year-old vehicles and stuff. But when you think back to our ferries that are currently in place, not the most recent ones, but the ones that are almost 50 years old, they were built right here in Newfoundland and Labrador, in Marystown and Cowhead. We could turn around and create an industry here in Newfoundland and Labrador. We are in the ferry business. We are always going to be in the ferry business. So let's make sure that we develop industry right here in our province and focus on that.
I will say this, you know, I take the Kayak W across to Labrador. It was, I think, purchased from Norway, a very different boat for our waters. But to Mr. Wakeham's point, I think if there's going to be ferries built, make sure they're built here and we get the maximum amount of work. As for and we probably have a better ferry as well for the conditions we live in.
Okay, well, it's really clicking along here tonight. We're coming to the end, and That ends this debate portion of the evening. So I want to thank the leaders and our local journalists, NTV's Ben Cleary, The Telegram's Cameron Kilfoy, and VOCM's Russell Bowers for their contributions to this evening's debate. And thank you also for the comments and the questions from you, the voters. So we're going to turn now to closing statements from each of our party leaders. The order has been selected at random. You each have a little more than a minute to make your final pitch. So tell us why your party should lead this province. John Hogan, we begin with you.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity tonight, and thanks to everybody, and thanks to Mr. Wakeham and Mr. Dinn as well. And I'm standing here tonight because I truly believe the Newfoundland and Labrador dream is right in front of us. It's within our reach. What is that dream? To me, I think ahead 20 years from now. I picture my children, your children, living just down the road in safe streets, and not living and working in other places in the country like Toronto or Fort McMurray. I think 10 years from now, when every tradesperson in this province shares in the prosperity that's been created by 10,000 new Churchill Falls jobs, we have more funding for healthcare, more funding for our communities, and a more affordable life for everybody. I think ahead to 5 years from now, we are charting our own course, and we're the envy of Canada, with a balanced budget and no more deficits ever. I think ahead to a few months from now, when we will eliminate provincial sales tax on electricity rates, saving everyone 10% on their electricity bills right away. Do not let anybody take this dream away from you. I am the leader standing here who can deliver on these promises. And for decades, we know Newfoundland and Labrador has been haunted by 1969. This deal will change everything. We can move forward with diligence and a plan that delivers results, or go back to the old ways of missed opportunities, reckless gambles, and put everything we've already achieved at risk. I believe in this province. I believe in our potential. And I believe that together we can build a strong and fair Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. Mr. Wakeham, your final thoughts.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Carolyn, the moderator. I want to thank our panelists, and I want to thank my colleagues here, both John and Jim, for participating, and thank you for the questions. My questions now are for the people in Newfoundland and Labrador. After 10 years of Liberal government, is your health care better? Do you feel safer in your own communities? Is it easier for you to make ends meet? I want to run to be Premier of the Newfoundland and Labrador because I believe that everyone in our province, all of us, should have better access to health care, lower taxes, and safer communities. I'm a kid from Placentia Bay. I grew up and lived here in Newfoundland and Labrador and was able to work all over Newfoundland and Labrador, including Labrador. And during that time, I was able to raise my family here. And I didn't have to leave the province of Newfoundland and Labrador to do that. And I want more people to have that same opportunity. As I have said, I want our province to be somewhere where people simply don't come from. They come to a place where people want to live, not leave. And so on October 14th, I ask you to vote for change. Vote for a PC government. Thank you very much.
Jim Dinn, you will end us off.
Thank you, folks. Thank you to my colleagues, the journalists, and for people who tuned in. Folks, for the past 6 years, I've had the privilege of serving you. In that time, I've had conversations with people who laid bare their souls at their most vulnerable times of their lives. And I want you to know I have heard you. I'm tired of seeing people struggle and feeling powerless to help because successive governments have failed to listen. From the get-go, the Newfoundland and Labrador NDP committed to a 4-year costed platform that is practical, thoughtful, and doable. We didn't wait until the last minute to release it, and our platform doesn't require a tax increase. You deserve that respect as a voter. We are committed to you, your family, and your community. And the same goes for the Churchill Falls MOU, which the PCs and Liberals have turned into a partisan political football. The New Democratic Party has been the adult in the room. I was 10 years old when the first Churchill Falls contract was signed. My oldest granddaughter will be the same age when this deal is finalized. I want the best future for my grandchildren, and that means focusing on the MOU's economic case. I know you're concerned about your province and want the best for your family. Like you, I'm tired of hearing the empty promises of parties who answer to large corporate donors. We have a great team of candidates. Our platform is about respect for you and addressing your concerns. Imagine what we can do with more NDP MHAs to represent you. Vote for the party committed to being your voice and getting a better deal for you on Election Day. Vote NDP and add a vibrant splash of orange to the House of Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim Dinn, and I'd like to thank you all once again for joining us this evening for this 90-minute special Newfoundland and Labrador Votes Leaders Debate live from the CBC studio here in St. John's. And Blue Jays fans, I think we've made it with just under 10 minutes to spare before tonight's big game. So, of course, we are 6 days out from Election Day, Tuesday, October 14th. You can check out your location of your nearest polling station by heading to elections.gov.nl.ca, or you can call Elections Newfoundland and Labrador. Have your say on who will lead this province for the next 4 years. I've been your moderator, Carolyn Stokes. Thank you so much for joining us, and good night.